Welcome to the first episode of our coverage on Venom Let There Be Carnage. Today's video is shockingly going to cover the near-complete history of the Carnage Symbiote and its main host, Celtus Kasady. Now, we will bring up other hosts that the Carnage Symbiote has bonded with during this video, but only briefly, as the main and most deadly host of the symbiote is Kasady. Now, before we go any farther, Carnage is very popular and has been around for a while, so this video isn't going to cover every comic or panel he appears in, but it will cover the vast majority of major events he's in and his contribution to those events. If you feel like I missed something big, then let me know down in the comments section below. The Carnage symbiote is the offspring of the most popular and oldest symbiote, at least from a publishing perspective in the Marvel Universe, Venom. The first full appearance of Venom was Amazing Spider-Man 300, and it only took Marvel about 60 issues to realize that symbiotes print money, so we should probably make another one. Today's video is sponsored by Magic Spoon. Who doesn't love cereal? I know I do, but as I got older, I stopped eating it because most cereals are chock full of sugar and crap, and I would rather eat a comic than most cereals aimed at adults. But that all changes with Magic Spoon. It's 0 grams of sugar, 14 grams of protein, and only 4 net grams of carbs in each serving, and it's only 140 calories. Magic Spoon also comes in a variety of flavors, like peanut butter, chocolate, fruity, and frosted. Personally, I'm pretty fond of the fruity flavor. It's actually already made it into my plastic reusable bin that my wife makes us use. It's also keto-friendly, gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, and low-carb. So click the link below to grab a variety pack and try it today, and be sure to use the promo code KEYISSUES at checkout to get $5 off any order, or go to magicspoon.com/keyissues. And Magic Spoon is so confident in their product, it's backed with a 100% happiness guarantee, so if you don't like it for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. And also, for my Canadian and British fans, Magic Spoon is now shipping to Canada and the UK. So click the link below and use code KEYISSUES for $5 off, or go to magicspoon.com/keyissues to save $5 today. Carnage is one of those characters that's seen a number of times before his credited first appearance, having multiple cameos. The first time that you see the actual Carnage symbiote itself is in a single panel from Amazing Spider-Man 345. He then appears again in a second cameo in Amazing Spider-Man 360, however, somehow his first true appearance is considered to be the Amazing Spider-Man 361. But before we get into the spawn of Venom, we should start a few issues before that discussing the first appearance of Celtus Kasady, the man who would become Carnage. Celtus Kasady's first appearance is in Spider-Man 344 by David Michelinie and Eric Larson. Kasady is the cellmate of Eddie Brock, the longtime and most popular host of the Venom symbiote. Kasady is a cannibalistic serial killer whose exploits as a killer were national news at the time of his arrest. Eddie Brock was recently incarcerated, and his symbiote Venom was believed to be dead, having been exposed to the lethal touch of the villain's sticks. However, the symbiote doesn't die because Venom is popular and makes a ton of money. Instead, it's explained that Venom just needed time to heal itself. Once healed, Venom seeks out Eddie Brock in Rikers Island. Celtus and Eddie are far from friends, with Celtus attempting to turn Brock into a nihilist and murderer like himself. Eddie, in turn, kicks the crap out of him quite frequently. One evening, when Eddie's working out in his cell, Kasady attempts to shank him with a shiv that he had made before the Venom symbiote comes busting through the outside cell bars, bonding to Eddie, and helps him escape. But unbeknownst to Eddie, the Venom symbiote leaves behind a little piece of itself on the cell bars. This little bit of symbiote was actually the offspring of the Venom symbiote. It was the 999th symbiote in the Venom family lineage. The new offspring enters into Kasady's body through a cut on his left hand that he got during Eddie's breakout, and unlike other symbiotes, the Carnage symbiote ends up bonding with Kasady's blood completely. Now dubbing himself Carnage, he kills a security guard and escapes. Carnage goes on a multiple month-long killing spree, each time spray painting Carnage rules onto the walls near the scenes of his murders, which actually rules. Initially, the description of the killer makes Spider-Man believe that the murders are being done by Venom, which is admittedly a bit out of character for Eddie Brock, but after doing a little bit of computer research at the library, Spider-Man identifies Kasady as the prime suspect, unveiling a bit of his backstory. Now, at this point in the video, I want to take a detour because it seems pertinent. Kasady was born in Ravencroft Psychiatric Hospital to a mother who was believed to be a paranoid schizophrenic who died just after his birth. Kasady also died in childbirth due to his umbilical cord being wrapped around his neck. Kasady claims that when he died, he was sent to hell, where he witnessed an endless abyss, which helped him form this nihilistic and sickening mindset later in life. However, one thing to consider here is that Kasady is criminally insane, so a lot of what he says can be taken with a grain of salt. When Kasady's mother died, he was sent to live with multiple people who all noticed severe antisocial traits coming from Kasady as a young child. First, he lived with an abusive older woman, Nana, believed to be his biological grandmother on his mother's side. However, he killed her by pushing her down a flight of stairs after she beat him. He then went to live with a couple, Roscoe and Louise, believed to be his biological father and stepmother. However, Kasady ended up killing and torturing their family dog with a power drill. His father, Roscoe, proceeded to beat him for it, and when Louise stepped in to try and get him to stop, he pushed her over, knocking her head into a coffee table, killing her. He was arrested and sentenced to death. Basically, anybody Kasady came into contact with befell horrible tragedies. Eventually finding himself in St. Estes Home for Boys, Kasady became the victim of bullying by other children. But even that didn't last very long because he set the boys' home ablaze, murdering the administration and other orphans who had bullied him. So yeah, a really lovely childhood. Anyways, back in the future, Carnage is tracked down by Spider-Man to the ruins of the St. Estes boys' home, where he's sitting naked around a campfire playing with a teddy bear like a totally normal, sane person. When Spider-Man is spotted, all hell breaks loose in the two battle. However, Spider-Man learns that Carnage is drastically more powerful than Venom or himself. Additionally, Carnage can do things that Venom just isn't capable of, like turning his symbiote into sharp stabbing weapons or firing pieces of it off like projectiles, and in general just being a really big badass. Spider-Man determines that if he's going to have any chance against Carnage, he needs a partner, and the only person that's going to be strong enough to help him in this case is Venom. Spider-Man is able to track down Johnny Storm, who helps him in turn hunt down Venom, who had been content to live on a tropical island alone, believing that he had killed Spider-Man. When he finds out that Spider-Man is alive, they fight for a bit before deciding to partner up when Spider-Man tells Venom about his new offspring. The two return to New York, track down Kasady, and fight, with Carnage proving to be more powerful than either of them. When Venom and Spider-Man begin to work as a team and get the upper hand, Carnage escapes by kidnapping a baby and throwing it off of a ledge. Spider-Man and Venom track him to the Daily Bugle, where he kidnaps and leaves with J. Jonah Jameson. They then track Carnage down to a heavy metal concert, and a battle ensues throughout New York, eventually meeting in Madison Square Garden. Spider-Man is able to get the upper hand when he turns the speaker volume to the max and blasts the symbiote off of Carnage and Venom. With Carnage now incapacitated, Venom tries to double-cross Spider-Man, but Mr. Fantastic shows up and blasts him with a sonic gun, and Carnage and Venom are both recaptured. At this point, it's believed that the Carnage symbiote is dead. However, it's actually bonded with Kasady's blood, and he's returned to the Ravencroft Institute for the Criminally Insane, and when a doctor attempts to draw his blood from him, it sets his symbiote loose again. This ends up becoming a common pain point, as the perfect bonding between the two requires significant upgrades to house Kasady to prevent his symbiote from escaping via even the smallest cut. For example, a favorite comic of mine is Amazing Spider-Man Annual 28, where Kasady is being transported by a tractor trailer encased in a ridiculous apparatus designed to prevent him from self-harm. Kasady ends up biting a metal bar that's in his mouth so hard that it draws blood, which frees the Carnage symbiote. All of these minor events end up with Spider-Man kicking Kasady's butt and him being imprisoned again. There are multiple short stories and even a crossover event called Planet of the Symbiotes here that sees Carnage gain the ability to consume other symbiotes to increase his mass, almost completely conquering the planet, but ultimately he is stopped by Spider-Man, the Scarlet Spider Ben Reilly, and Venom. The most popular Carnage story takes place a few years later in the crossover event Maximum Carnage. Maximum Carnage was a big deal when it came out, with a huge marketing push and even a video game for the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo. Carnage frees himself after slashing his wrists using his handcuffs. He recruits fellow prisoner Shriek, who he falls in love with, and begins to recruit other insanely powerful spider foes as part of his own twisted version of a family. Spider-Man, in turn, must recruit multiple heroes: Cloak and Dagger, Deathlock, Captain America, Iron Fist, and of course Venom to aid in the battle against Carnage and his forces of chaos. Spider-Man and Venom were eventually able to defeat Carnage, and Venom was able to return to San Francisco, where he had been living as the Lethal Protector. Let's take a quick detour here and discuss two alternate hosts of the Carnage symbiote. First is Ben Reilly, better known as Scarlet Spider or later just Spider-Man, who bonded with Carnage after it left Kasady, bonded with John Jameson, and started running amok. After nearly driving Ben mad, he came to Kasady to try and learn how to control the parasite. However, it was blasted off of Ben using microwave radiation, and it crawled through a faucet to return to Kasady. The second is when Spider-Man and the Silver Surfer faced off against Carnage. The Silver Surfer triggered latent genetic memories of Galactus devouring planets with symbiotes on them. These memories would again be genetically latent because the Carnage symbiote wasn't born until far after these events took place. This causes the Carnage symbiote to lash out and bond with the Silver Surfer, which it does, creating cosmic carnage. And I mean, tell me that that is not badass looking. You can't. Kasady, left without the symbiote, is found to have a stomach tumor, and Spider-Man brings him to the hospital. Eventually, the Carnage symbiote is returned to Kasady to prevent him from dying, but the Silver Surfer encases him in energy to prevent him from harming anyone else. It's never actually explained how he escapes, though, but who cares? Comics. The original Carnage symbiote is next completely devoured by Venom, becoming part of Venom again, and in turn, Kasady manages to break out of prison again. And I'm sorry, New York, but you gotta step up your security on a serial-killing intergalactic space parasite. Kasady has some very minor remnants of the symbiote in his bloodstream, not enough to transform or do any cool stuff, but enough to be stronger and faster. This is later known as a Codicy, but he escapes, and although Spider-Man tries to stop him, he enters into a cosmic portal into the negative zone. Carnage ends up meeting Blastar, the Bomb Burst, who plans to march an army through this portal and invade Earth. And this story is not good, I'm gonna be honest, don't read it. The point here is that Carnage finds another symbiote in a containment unit underground in the negative zone. Kasady digs this symbiote out and finds that it is an identical version of the original Carnage symbiote. Kasady ends up becoming Carnage once more, but eventually they are defeated, he returns to Earth, and that's kind of the whole point, is that he gets to go back to Earth and have a viable reason why the Carnage symbiote is back. Alright, at this point in the video, I'm going to jump forward in time quite a bit. There are a number of miniseries with Carnage that I'm mostly going to skip over as they aren't super important, and most of the stuff that happens in them doesn't affect Carnage long term. However, two I do want to highlight are ones that involve the birth of Carnage's children. Venom vs. Carnage sees the birth of Toxin, who bonded to a New York City cop, Pat Mulligan. This was the 1000th symbiote in the Venom family lineage. Much later, Kasady was imprisoned in the Raft, and during a massive breakout attempt that took place in New Avengers, the Sentry flew Carnage into orbit and ripped him in half. He was presumed dead, but saved again by the Carnage symbiote and put into a coma. Eventually, we learned that Kasady had survived and been outfitted with prosthetic legs and was recovering to some degree. A Dr. Tanis Neves bonds with the Carnage symbiote for a short period of time during this story, and during that time, the Carnage symbiote gives birth to an infant symbiote. This symbiote was combined with a form of prosthesis and created an entirely new type of symbiote offspring, Scorn. Again, there are so many Carnage appearances, mini-stories, and standalones that it's crazy, but in terms of major events, the next major thing that happens is that the Carnage symbiote is once again removed from Cletus after summoning the dark god Kython. It's also imbued and enhanced with eldritch magic at this point. However, once separated, the Carnage symbiote is put into the Lockbox, a giant aquatic storage facility for dangerous alien artifacts, until it is eventually Norman Osborn who has the Carnage symbiote stolen and given to him after recently losing his powers. Osborn bonds with the Carnage symbiote to become Red Goblin, and Red Goblin was a tremendously popular character when he broke onto the scene, but ultimately, the character of Norman Osborn identifies that Carnage and not himself would get credit for finally killing Spider-Man and decides to rip the symbiote from himself. In this process, though, he creates a split personality with Osborn, one his own and one Kasady's. But ultimately, this video is about Kasady and Carnage and not really other versions of Carnage. Kasady is recruited by an alien race of beings called the Poison Hive and taken to their mothership in space and given access to the Carnage symbiote once again. And I'm gonna level with you, I was not a big fan of the Poison storyline, and ultimately the only important thing here that happens is that Kasady is flown into space with this hybrid Poison Carnage symbiote and eventually gets sucked back into Earth's atmosphere, and both the Carnage symbiote and Kasady burn up. But it's comics, so his body is badly burnt, but alive and recovered by the cult of Null and reanimated. Null, for those of you living under a rock, is the god of symbiotes, first introduced in the insanely popular Donny Cates run of Venom. Scorn, along with other cultists, find Kasady's badly burnt body and recover it, and they combined it with a piece of Null's own personal dragon symbiote known as Grendel. It is at this point that we learn some really interesting information about symbiotes, in that symbiotes retain a small piece of genetic information imprinted onto themselves associated with everybody who ever bonded with them. All of this information collectively is referred to as the Codex. Scorn had hoped to turn Kasady into a new vessel for Null, but Kasady was reanimated by the Grendel symbiote and managed to fight off Null's psychic influence and instead ripped out and consumed Scorn's spine. Because of the fact that Scorn once held the Carnage symbiote, she provided the primordial information necessary for Kasady to transform this small sliver of the Grendel symbiote into a reincarnated version of Carnage. Carnage enacts a plan to kill and consume the codicy of everyone who ever bonded with a symbiote. The plan takes place over a number of comics across a few different series, with Carnage infecting and turning a ton of people into his own personal army of symbiotes using brain parasites. He even manages to consume Alejandra Jones, taking on the characteristics of a carnageized Ghost Rider. As the event Absolute Carnage goes on, he eventually consumes the Venom symbiote, which is bonded to Hulk and is transformed into the most powerful version of Carnage we've seen, Dark Carnage. Absolute Carnage is relatively new, and it's a pretty wild ride and essentially takes a good bit of time to explain in itself. The long and short here is that Carnage continues his process of consuming people who at one point had been infected with symbiotes until he's powerful enough to reawaken Null, the god of the symbiotes, who is presently being held inside of Clintar. Clintar is a living mass of symbiotes that are preventing Null from escaping, Clintar being the symbiote word for cage. Spider-Man, Venom, and a ton of Avengers end up taking Dark Carnage on. As Dark Carnage zeroes in on the remaining codices he needs to consume in order to release Null, ultimately Venom has to make the decision of whether or not to kill Carnage and ultimately free Null, or allow him to live and risk how powerful he had become. Venom ultimately manifested a Necrosword from a new, more powerful primordial version of his own Venom symbiote. Venom uses this Necrosword to cut Carnage in half, killing Carnage and Kasady in the process, but also freeing Null, which leads to the event King in Black that I'm not going to cover today. But remember, this is comics, and where there's money to be made, a character will always reappear. Kasady and Carnage both died, but they are currently alive within the hive mind of the symbiote species, and only time will tell what their next steps are. But one thing is for sure, Carnage and Kasady will return, it's only a matter of time. I know this video was crazy long, and towards the end I really had to start paraphrasing some events here in order to prevent this video from being like 40 minutes, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you learned a lot, and if you did, consider liking and subscribing, and also, dropping a comment, sharing this on social media, sending me money in the mail, whatever you want to do. This has been Nick with Key Issues. Thank you again for watching, and remember the motto, Carnage over everything.